help children with cerebral palsy improve basically what we call ankle dorsiflexion, or the ability to bend your foot upwards towards your nose, because typically children with cerebral palsy kind of drag their toes when they walk, depending on what type of cerebral palsy they have. But that leads to falling, tripping and falling. And so ultimately what we were trying to do is find a new way to get them to be able to utilize lifting their toes so that they were more stable with walking, so they didn't have as many falls. I came into the PhD program. This research was part of my PhD, and came into the PhD program having 7 years of clinical experience working with children. And all of those years, I had at least 2 to 3 children or more on my caseload that had cerebral palsy. So I had a lot of firsthand working knowledge of some of the problems that some of these individuals had, some of these children had. And then I love video games. There was a project going on basically when I started using the same technology that I used for my research, but was looking at children with cerebral palsy with their upper extremity, their arms, trying to learn how to do better reach and grasp using the same technology. And so I just had adapted it for the legs, which was more my interest from my background. There were several different challenges that I faced, as all researchers face. One that actually was a challenge that I didn't necessarily anticipate being as big of a challenge as it was participant recruitment and finding enough children to complete my study. I thought that part was going to be relatively easy, and it was really, really difficult to find children that met the inclusion criteria that I had established, that didn't have the exclusion criteria that I had established, and that were willing to participate in the 12-week program. Some of the laptops that we had were starting to fail, and so they weren't holding a charge, and it was really critical that they were playing on a laptop because of some of the wireless interference with signals and everything else that was happening. Having machines plugged in really created a lot of interference, and children couldn't basically play the video game as it was designed, being plugged in. So having laptops fail was a real challenge, and I spent a lot of time on the phone with participants and their parents with tech support trying to figure out how to get the system to actually work. Working with the children was always the most fun, and getting to see the unique new way for them to get to be able to play a video game, that they really enjoyed that as well. All of a sudden we just hook up a couple of electrodes to their shin muscles on both sides, and then they basically just played a video game by either lifting their toes or just thinking about lifting their toes and generating that neurological signal to the muscles, even if it may not actually contract to the point of generating movement. That's where this research kind of filled the gap, is to have what we call biofeedback, in that yes, you are doing the correct thing, send more of those signals to your leg, and then all of a sudden we will start to see movement. So that was really cool to be able to see some of those gaps being bridged, and children really start to take some ownership of being able to move their feet like that. Overall, what we found was that every participant improved in one of those dimensions, but we only had a few participants that improved in multiple dimensions. And ultimately what we discovered is that the more you played, the more you gained. Know your question. Have a good question before you try to answer it. Because when you formulate a good question, the methods become a lot easier to figure out than if you kind of start with methods and then try to answer a question and you're trying to fit a square peg into a round hole at that point. So really starting with a good question and forming your data collection and data analysis and everything else kind of around how do I answer this question is important.